All right, can everyone there on the live stream hear me? Looks like Jose and Trenton. I'm not sure who Nap is. Yeah, I didn't really address this. I mean, I asked everyone to use their name on the Discord, but when you come in on the Google chat, if you're using your Maricopa name, that comes up. But like, if you're not, then just say who you are, because that makes it a little bit easier there. Like, I'm not quite sure who Cookie Hunter is. Cookie Hunter 1357. There's 1,356 other Cookie Hunters, perhaps. That seems like a lot. It's a lot of cookie hunting. All right, I saw some of this stuff coming in on Discord, and that's looking good. People are really starting to, pun intended, key in on the keyframing, which is great. Let's look at some other ramifications of this here, as we're really breaking apart our different types of principles of motion design. So we really looked at these from a bunch of different angles here. Let's look at anticipation. Today, we'll start off with that at least. The demonstration graphic is easy enough to understand, right? We have a bounce, and the bounce has weight, right? So we have the acceleration towards the ground. There's no squashing or stretching here. It's just the fact that this ball on the left preps before it shoots up versus the ball here on the right. And so, I mean, it's a good example of anticipation in that we have some kind of motion that sets up the other motion. This does a lot to, when you're not working with humanoid-looking characters, anthropomorphize the shapes in terms of giving them their own, as if they're, back to our illusion of life, that they are able to move themselves, but move themselves in a world that has physics, as opposed to just sort of moving themselves in a way that makes it seem kind of unhinged or ungrounded. It still makes them seem as if they're operating in a world that has physics. So let's look at some gradations of anticipation, like we were doing with the mass and the weight, right? Not just making something look like it has weight, but we made something look like it was light, and something that made it look like it was heavy. Same thing here with anticipation. We can do a little bit of prep for movement or a lot of prep for movement, and we can see how that would influence a couple different things here. Okay, let me put this back over here. Let me bring Blender back up over here, and we'll use this one as our starting point. And we'll get rid of these for now. Okay, so let's move some. We'll start with a sphere here, and then we'll sort of branch off from there. So we'll start with our regular UV sphere. We'll make sure that we're shaded smooth. We'll give it a fun material for now. There we go. So that this can use as a starting point. Let's move it up here and sort of go from this. Right, so from here, we wanted to sort of ease in and ease out of its position. And so let's just sort of block out as we get many more, as the animations get more complex, we're going to be adhering, to this more, block out the keyframes, which is just sort of get the rough positioning. I need it to be here at that time. Then working on dialing in the easing and adjusting the Bezier handles. Good. Okay, so let's come back over here. And we're just going to work on the X here for this one for right now. And so we're going to be, let's give ourselves, instead of starting the animation on frame 0, right, we're going to be making animations that have anticipation. So I'm going to move it over a little bit so we got some more space. Give it a ½ second before we get started. And so we're going to be here. Actually, let's make it a second. What about there? So we're going to be here, and we want to make it to over here. And so I'll move the playhead and move this over. Set another keyframe by hand, just sort of clicking there. And so, lots of scooters. We got a scooter in the morning class, too.
I got plasma.
What's that?
I got plasma donation.
Oh, great.
And then one more kind of special.
So we're easing in and easing out here, but let's get some anticipation happening. Also, let's make this a bit quicker. So in order to make it quicker, we need to have less time between the two keyframes, and so I'll move these a little bit further in, like so. Maybe move it this way just a touch. And if we come back to our graph editor here, in this view, our anticipation needs to happen in that we go backwards before we go forwards. Oh, I turned it off by accident. There we go. Let's select there. There we go. Now we can see it. And so we need to come down and up. With the Bezier handles, some of you may have done this unintentionally at this point. And our default Bezier handle patterns is that we have stuff that's going to be balanced. And so if you drag the Bezier handles a lot, you can end up with situations where they go past where the keyframe was. This is sort of like a, this is going to look like anticipation in that it goes back before it goes forward. And let's see exactly what this looks like. So if we come back here and run this. So we go back before we go forward. So we cleared the lowest bar there in terms of anticipation. The reason I don't encourage people to do it this way is with Bezier handles, this ends up being sort of less controllable. This shape of this arc is not only controlled by this Bezier handle, but then also over here. If we do anything with this, it sort of travels down the arc and ends up over here as well. So this ends up not being, except in just the simplest of cases, a really great, best practices strategy. If we make another keyframe in here, so if we select this and we press I for insert on selected channels, right? So I haven't been using that one quite as much. I is the shortcut when you're in this view for insert keyframe, but it immediately pulls up the menu where you can see, do you want it to be on all channels or only selected channels? In most cases, certainly today, we're probably just going to be doing only selected channels or only selected F-curve so that we can have control over what's happening. And so here, now I have a second or a third keyframe, right? This is the first one, this is the third one, and here's the one in the middle. That now allows me to sort of control this a little bit better. If I were to change the end easing here at all, now the anticipation timing is isolated from whatever's happening on the rest of this here, right? So if we want this to speed up and then kind of ease into the last spot, sort of like this, like so. Remember here, if we right click on this, we can go to handles free, and that allows us to dial these in. A little bit like so. So we'll sort of step back and then accelerate into the ease for the other movement. So back here, there you go, control space. If I look at this now,
I think I forgot my mouse in the library.
okay, I mean, if you need to go get it, it's fine. So we're going back and forward. I feel like it's gliding, but maybe taking a little bit too long to do it. And so I can grab this and move this back a little bit snappier motion. The other place where you might want to put another keyframe here is at the apex of this in here, because this allows you to control exactly how far back in the anticipation you're going. So if I press I and only selected channels there, now I can sort of control exactly how far back if it was really necessary that this did not go off screen. So you see, this is still the same kind of shape that we had previously, but by having keyframes on the F-curves there at each juncture or each point at which it changes direction, gives us a little bit more control over what's happening in the keyframing. So as if it was on a someone's pulling it back like a rubber band slingshot kind of thing. Okay, Ivan's there. And I want it to ease out even more. And so over here, I'm going to grab this handle and drag that to really just slowly, 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 as if we're on ice. Cool. We got that one in place. So we'll call this one perhaps our simple or just regular anticipation. Let's look at something with some more wind up here. So if we come in another with a UV sphere here, again, I'll give it a slightly different color here. And we're going to have this one wind up some more. In fact, yeah, let's go ahead and switch from sphere. Let's mix it up a little bit with a cube. And have this set up. And I do prefer doing this for the first keyframe, and then once that's in place, I can easily press I to move things around, or set more keyframes. And so there's that one, and then we want to, again, go backwards. So I'll press I, there we go, on this one, but move it back. And then forward. All right, and we have the same kind of thing in place, but let's have it wind up longer. So the distance between here and here, that's how much time we're taking to prep the motion, and we can expand that a bunch. So I want to take this and again give it a little bit more dramatic ease into the last spot, kind of like the top one, just to create some more slope here. Remember, an increased slope, a sharper slope equals more velocity. You know, definitely when it's applied to position, but then sometimes when it's applied to rotation as well. And so here we can move this back. And so now this one's going to take longer to wind up and then go. And so if we look at this one by itself, I really like zooming. When I'm doing this kind of like really intricate keyframing work, I really like looking at just the curves here. And I'm going to make this one free. And maybe give myself another keyframe right here. There we go. Just I enter. And this is going to be kind of like anticipation. We're going to sort of accelerate into the anticipation area here. And so this, by holding this beforehand, we can sort of create this tension and zip out of it. And if we look at that here, let's zoom out. Let's come in here and put a material on this. And so we start off with that increased wind up there. You could even give it its own thing. Just like we did with the bounce, you could have anticipation for the anticipation. And so if that were, we could do something like this. Again, I, selected area, zoom in here, and now, and then shoot forward. Some of you may, I'm going to save this one. Now that we're moving things like a lot more with more velocity than we were in the past, we have to look at some motion blur can play a role here. We'll discuss this in more detail later, but in here it's going to be in the rendering output. If you go to renderer, motion blur, I usually have this off in Blender. It's looking okay right now. There's a lot of instances where you have motion blur checked on, and in the editor, it ends up giving you a bunch of motion lines that become kind of like, they're not exactly how they're going to be rendered, and it ends up being not that great. And so here we got this extra anticipation starting up. I kind of want this to be even more. So I'm going to turn this up, right? How do I increase the amount of time for the anticipation? It's going to be this over here. And so moving both of these keyframes, whoops, not all of them, just these here, over, allows me to increase that time even more. Boom. Right, so really wind up there. And the amount of time you're sort of holding it back there in that held area sort of helps this, again, sort of flattening this out. Remember, when it's flat here, that means we're kind of at a standstill. And so, boom. By doing that, it gives us an even sharper slope here. and makes that even more. Let's give that one a label. This one is going to be, we'll call it wind up. Everybody still there on the live stream? My audio is coming through. You guys know that if there's ever a problem with the audio, you know to say something right away so that we don't have a disaster. Disaster meaning like no live stream. Cool. Okay, so now let's look at both of those together, right? And so here's both curves, right? So the one with the extra wind up in anticipation for the anticipation, very, very, very subtle, right? Look how short this is. A lot of like what really starts to matter here are smaller motions like this. This, when it comes out, this is probably 3 frames, right? Or for 24 frames a second. And so these kind of very, very tiny details really do a lot to make things speak. Remember, even though you have to keep this in mind, coming in here, zooming in to this level is useful, right? Because we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And remember, even though the line itself looks like it's smooth from here to here, this is a picture and this is a picture, right? And animation is just a series of pictures shown at a sufficient speed to make it look as if there's motion. And so if it went further in this pre-anticipation thing, like if this was more of like this kind of shape, but all of this happened here, like this, the ball would never get to this location because this is in between frames. Okay, not tweening. This is like in between the 2 pictures, right? The ball's either going to be here or it's going to be there. And so when you zoom into this level, right, where we see frame 4, frame 5, right? When I zoom out, you'll notice that the numbers start to skip here, right? 2, there's 3, but then if I keep zooming out, there we have, like, this is every, whatever it is, 6 here. And when you're zoomed in and we're doing things that are this short, it's really important to keep that in mind. You can sort of do that here with the backwards and forwards controls. What are these ones? These are just arrow, yeah. Right, and so here, with the arrows, you can sort of step through the animation 1 frame at a time, which really helps, I think, make this concept clear. That, again, you only have what's in each frame to communicate everything. Cool. Okay, so let's get another cube. There we go. And bring this down. And I'm going to take these things and move them up, or just these 3 maybe, and move them up a little bit, just to give myself a little bit of room. Notice that I don't put things up, I don't have things parked up against the edges of the frame. This is just sort of bad design. For anticipation, it kind of goes out to the edge of the frame, or it goes past it perhaps. That kind of thing, fine, right? But in terms of like when things come to rest, you want it to exhibit good visual design. I was talking to a friend about this weekend. You can print out any frame and hang it on the wall, right? That's sort of that's what we're aiming at, right? There's a really great account both on Twitter and Blue Sky that just posts 1 frame from all of the Spider-Verse stuff every day. And yeah, I mean, the work on those films is so strong that like it really works. Like every day it's like, oh yeah, that's a standalone image. It really works as you could print this out, hang it on the wall to be a compelling image, right? And so, yeah, this is kind of the target. that not just the keyframes, but everything kind of works visually here. So in our case, it's making sure that we have enough space. And so you want to have something like that, especially when we're working in kind of like a 2D, it's in Blender, but we're kind of just moving stuff in 2D at this point. We have this sort of setup. I think we can put that in the camera. Can't we put that in the camera? I don't quite remember. If we go over to the camera and go to the camera settings, and then go to viewport display, composition guides, thirds. No. Do they not have the title safe? You can pull it up in After Effects. It's right there. But After Effects is more designed for that kind of thing. I bet it's an add-on. Oh, maybe not depending on the camera. Oh, and the video sequencer. No, there's no quick answer there. There's almost certainly an add-on for that. Anyways, my point is not to do this, where you clearly make things look as if they are sitting on the edge of the frame, either like that. Another thing I see students do at the beginning is like do things like this, where you make the text especially look like it's sitting on the bottom of the frame. All of this is just not great design. We want to be able to have some sort of padding around the entire thing there. Okay, let's come in with this cube, and we're going to do something different here. Up until now, we've been doing the anticipation, in the same dimension, the same track, right? Each of these being a single track, right? But how else could we communicate this? We could sort of wind up and not only move backwards, but we could rotate, right? As if the box is boom, and then it goes, right? And so in that case, we'd want the box as if it were on the ground here to rotate back in this direction. So kind of like this. And so this kind of thing is going to require moving the axis or anchor point, right? So you'll hear the Blender word is origin. Okay, that's the Blender documentation. When you're looking for anchor point, that's what you're looking for. You'll hear me use the word anchor point, or axis for that. And so here, let's go ahead and change that. I'm going to look at it directly in orthographic view there by hitting 1. Then I'm going to go to origins. Then I'm going to turn on snapping, and that makes it easy to move this and snap it right to that corner over there, right to that corner. And so now if I were to rotate this, whoops, once I get out of origin mode, right? So this, if this is not visible, you press N to open up the drawer. This is where you have these menus, which we use pretty often. And then after this is where we see a lot of the add-on interface. And so mine may look different from yours if I have some other add-ons or extensions installed. So inside this N drawer, and again, if you don't press N, it's actually this tiny, tiny little triangle thing right here. If you press that, it opens up the drawer, and then you have that. And so in the tool menu here is where you can select to edit the anchor point for this. And so now when I turn that off, if I press R, there we go. We can see how now we have the kind of rotation that we would want to make this happen, right? And so now let's combine that with what we've got. And so we'll move this back. Over here, we'll turn snapping off so that we have free use of this. And yeah, I'll move it over here. And yeah, I'm going to keyframe the X movement as per usual. But then when we're rotating, not that one, or not scale. Yeah, in my case, it's going to be the Y. It should be Y rotation for you too. Not rotating in that direction, not rotating in that direction, rotating in this direction. All right. And so I'm going to set a keyframe there so that both of those are in the F-curve view, and we can see what we're doing there. And so now we can wind these up. And so we move forward in time, but backwards in space, right? Or, we could block out the whole thing. We know we want to end up here. And so select X location, press I, and set a keyframe there for that. And yeah, probably want a keyframe there for the rotation as well. So yeah, now we're in the world of keyframing multiple things. So when this is the case, I think my tendency usually is to add a keyframe to all tracks. Even if there's just more significant stuff happening to one track and not the other, especially in situations like this where we're talking about 2 or 3 or 4 tracks, adding a keyframe to all of them, right? Because here at the end, we're going to have already returned to a regular, like the flat rotation at that point. And so perhaps it's not necessary to have a keyframe there from a mathematical standpoint, like we will already have flattened out probably over here. But being able to still keep this vertical alignment between the points where important things are happening versus one of them not having a keyframe there, I think is not only useful here, it also, I think, makes the dope sheet view a little bit more discernible, and that you don't have these gaps in between there. I just find it an easier way to work. And so we have both of those. Okay. And the only problem there is I didn't actually move the object. There we go. And so now right, if I select both of them and press I, only select the channels. There we go. Now it updates that one correctly. When you already have keyframes, and then I want to fix this one, if you're dealing with a small amount of time like this, it's usually pretty easy because it kind of like you can snap to that frame. You want to be careful about this kind of thing, is that you think you're on the same area, but you're not. You're over the keyframe, but you're not. And you press I, and you set another one. And what you actually have now is 2 keyframes really close together. This is something to keep a lookout for. This is part of the reason I've trimmed my whole project here to just like 120 frames, right? As opposed to it being like 700 frames, where this kind of thing can happen very easily, and you can't see it until you zoom way, 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 way in, right? And so there's that. If you press I and you want to update the keyframe, make sure that you're actually on that frame. You can zoom in, and then it should be pretty easy to lock to that view. Okay. There we go. Okay, let's move these over a little bit. That gives us some room for the anticipation. And so let's move backwards. And press I. And there we go. And so here, we're moving back. I. There we go. But we want to actually have the rotation change. And so here with this one, as we're moving backwards here, let's zoom in. this is one of those things where I just sort of grabbed it and started moving. And so, yeah, it's a little bit confusing. The keyframes are these. These are the Bezier handles. So the Bezier handles can be in between the frames. The keyframe should snap to it. And so here, and go. So we've got kind of what we want, and it slams forward to animate along where we want. Let's give it a little bit of that pre-motion, anticipation. So over here, and this is a case where it looks good on the graph, but it's not really what we want to have happening physically, right? We want it to sort of move back, but then start to rotate when it slows down here, right? Because it's like this, the rotation is caused by sort of the, hitting of the wind up of the rubber band part here. So in that case, come back here, right about there. There's a couple different ways we could do this. When I still want it to be flat here, and so probably the cleanest way to go about this would be about copying and pasting that keyframe right there. And so that's going to be flat. Then boom. That's good. I want a little bit more velocity to the actual movement back. And so I'm going to extend that Bezier handle. Maybe move this one back a little bit more. So the relationship between the backward movement and then the lift has a lot to do with like just sort of the character of what you want to have in place here. Is this going to be a matter, when do we want this backwards lift to happen? And so determining the relationship between these two things in time, this may be a better, easier to work with in the dope sheet editor. Remember, if we just want to see the stuff that we're currently working on, only show selected is this button right here. And so the location is the top one. And so these two are when we're rotating back here, right? So here and here. If we grab these and sort of play with the timing of them a little bit. Moving the second one further forward, maybe kind of like this, right? Once I've got it blocked out, I can sort of experiment with some of this to see, now I can misalign these things in order to really look at the quality of motion. Right. If it starts moving too fast and it doesn't come in and doesn't slam down, we need the slamming down to be a little bit quicker. Let's look at it again. And if we go back like this, right, that's where we're at our maximum. And so something else to consider here, let's move this up. And what if don't hit our maximum backward motion? until we come into that area right there. Let's tune it so that we get a little bit of a throwback at that point, right? This is the highest velocity. And so at that point, it would be moving, right? How can I identify this as the highest velocity? Because this is the steepest curve there when we're moving. And so we have this point here, and then we could come in and press I, only select the channel, and have it move back a little bit more. So the initial wind up, and then this is a result of the forward motion. But let's just line it up a little bit. Let's look over here. Let's zoom out. And so here, moving these two with regards to that, maybe right about there. But being careful, this is one of those unintentional Bezier handle things up here, where we wanted this to be flat. And so in this case, on this one, I might change this to constant to make sure that this stays flat between here and here. And I want it to slam down even faster, so I'll make this one come in a little bit there. This would be how much we're actually rotating. And so if we wanted to rotate way less and then more, right? There we have a lot more on the second part of it, like as a result of the fast movement forward. Let's give it a material so that we can see a little bit better. I'm going to give it the white, I guess. And let's rotate a little bit more, a little bit earlier. And let's call this one rotation. So here's what these two look like. All right, so sort of winding up, and then this part where it's going quickly, I wanted this to motivate this, right? It's like in Fast and Furious when they make the car go so fast that the front of the car rears up and does a wheelie, which as far as I know, again, I'm not a car guy, this is not a thing I see very often on Arizona streets. I mean, sometimes, but we're going so quickly forward, that the top of this is rotated up to the, in this direction. You guys know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I suppose it happens way more, or it's way easier to execute on a motorcycle. Or perhaps scooter. Are you doing that on your scooter on the way over here?
I don't want to lose another tooth. One fake tooth is more than enough for me.
Cool. Let's look at this through the camera. Zoom out a little bit. There we go. So doing, starting to communicate things on more than one of the transform properties, right? We got position and rotation stuff interlocking there. Cool. Okay, that's good. Move these up just a touch. Let's save that. Then in here, if you're in a situation where you can't see what's happening with the tracks, for instance, let's tab back out or do this. Select this one. There we go. This button, normalize, right? And so if we have this selected like this, it expands everything so that it's normalized within the view. Right, because what are we looking at here? We're looking at X position and then degrees of rotation, right? And so the relationship between the two graphs in terms of like the up and downness of each one is totally independent, right? They're on two totally different scales, right? They're not related. What's important is the relationship between the timing of the events this way, right? And so the normalize here sort of expands it, right? So normalization, you have some sort of wave with some kind of data like this, and it goes from some sort of max to some sort of min. And when you normalize that data, you take the max and the min and you expand them to some sort of new range, or you contract them to some sort of new range, right? Normally, when you normalize something in a lot of mathematical contexts, you're taking some sort of random max and random min, or I should say arbitrary, and then you're putting it to be between 0 and 1. Because that just makes it way more convenient mathematically, right? If you want to take some sort of range and spread it out to 200, and it's between 0 and 1, all you need to do is multiply by 200 at that point. And so that makes this kind of thing much easier. But be aware of whether this is on or off. If you can't see anything because you've either like zoomed way out or you're way in, hitting this button can sort of like get you back to normal, so you can sort of see what's happening there in the view of what's going on. Cool. Let's save that one. I'm gonna go file save as. Cool. Okay, with that in mind, let's look at applying this to some rotation with weight. So we'll give ourselves another kind of hammer thing. Again, 32 is way too many, 16 is fine. I'm adjusting these here So that'll be like this, and I'm going to make it longer, kind of like that. And then maybe make another cylinder, kind of like so. And bring this down and use, oops. Actually, before I make any changes, I'm going to edit it over here, kind of like that, kind of like that. There we go, kind of like a polo mallet, or what's the backyard game with the mallets, with wickets? Croquet. And let's make this one a little bit more fun. So I'm going to shade smooth these things. There we go. Or shade auto smooth so that the cylinders look reasonable. There we go. Then let's go ahead and join these two. Control J. And then again, adjust our origin point. Make sure that we're in side view for doing that. Is this in a weird rotation? No, it's straight up and down. Okay, that's good. And so we want to rotate from up here. That's going to be good. So now we have that. If we want to, so this will be big swing. There we go. And anticipation in the rotation department is going to mean going in the opposite direction before we go in that direction. And so this is going to be two things. We're going to have the anticipation, and then also what equates to a bounce in the rotational way, in sort of a swing, and that's going to be going back and forth. A little bit different than the bounce in that we're not going to have this. Not going to have this sharp curve to it. Let's look through the camera. There we go. Get this over. Okay. And I want two colors on this, and so I'll tab into, let's give it this, and then if we want to select only part of it, I can tab into edit mode, select these faces over here, and Control L to get all of the, Control L, there we go, faces, and we need a second slot. There we go. So me, it's pink and blue. Okay. And so now I have this other section highlighted here, and where blue is selected, I can assign that to this one. And so you can assign, a lot of you guys already know this, you can assign the materials to separate sets of faces there. There's all sorts of more nuanced ways to do this, but now we have something that's at least two separate colors. I like that. Okay. And let's go ahead and do some rotating here in this direction. If this is going to be the default rotation for my object, Control A rotation, you see zeros that out, right? Because before, I think I rotated the primitive when I was just sort of like mocking this up, and this was my default rotation, right? And so if this is going to be the sort of at-rest state of it, you want to apply rotation. Okay, for those of you who've worked with Blender a lot before, you've heard me yell and yell and yell about applying scale, because it really affects the way all of the modifiers work. But here, applying rotation is the same concept. You zero out the default rotation so that you're not, so that when it comes to rest, it's 0, 0, 0. That makes it easy to see on the graph. It makes it easy to control the F-curves. But here, right now, it's not zeroed out. And if I select it and then Control A rotation, there we go. Now that is the 0, 0, 0 rotational. So let's go ahead and set the rotation there for that. And then we'll back it up in that we wanted to actually prep for the swing. And so let's move this over a little bit. And then we'll go back. There we go. Before we go forward. And put this on normalize. There we go. And so we want to swing past. And now we're kind of in a bounce situation. So now if we want to come back in the other direction, we have the situation where it needs to decrease in magnitude, and it depends, but kind of decrease in terms of the period or the amount of time it takes to get from peak to trough. I believe in a totally perfect physics sense, the amount of time it takes to go back and forth regardless of the distance in like a vacuum situation is exactly the same. But that's not how it plays out usually in the real world. So I'll go back a little bit. There we go. And now this way. Oops. There. Back, up, back. Move it forward some more. Not quite as far. Forward. Other way. Just setting the keyframes. There we go. And for some things like this, to make it really seem like, it's a real thing, try to animate past the end of it, right? So it's still swinging. Because these kind of pendulum things, if you've been to any sort of science museum, right, they've got the very long pendulum, and, like they've done the math. I want to say there's one in Europe that's been swinging for like 1,000 years or some nonsense. Like just a really long time. Because the only thing that's keeping it from going is like the friction from the air and the internal friction of the system to some extent. So anyways, making it go past the end a little bit. And so now if we look at this as is. So this is definitely true with swinging, right? So see how the timing kind of got messed up there at the end? We want these to be, I made them a little bit too quick. They need to be further away from the other ones. There we go, about like that, right? Looks more like a perfect sinusoidal period there. But when you have the automatic easing for these kind of swings, always doesn't look like it has enough weight to it for my eye. It looks like someone is moving it with a like they're like holding it and moving it back and forth. And so we want the swings we want them to hang more on the end. And that's a matter, when you have the Bezier handles, it becomes pretty easy. You can, let's turn this off, there we go. And let's, there we go. Grab all of the peaks here, like this. And then you should be able to drag all of the Bezier handles at the same time, right? So you can sort of stretch them that way and stretch them this way. Oops. There. And I'm just trying to avoid the first one. There we go. Like so, and like so. You want these to be symmetrical, okay? The same on each side. Having them be like this is going to look strange no matter what, but creating a bigger curve at the end here is going to, I think, usually result in a better sort of swing pattern. Right? We have that much longer swinging at each stage. And so now, that may be a little bit exaggerated. Let's not go quite that much. Right about there, and then right about there. This one doesn't go quite back far enough, and so let's move this one down. Let's move this one up right? And so you want this kind of like gradual decline on this side and gradual decline on this side, and about the same amount of time over here. Close. This one's a little bit, seems to take a little bit too long there. Just a couple frames sort of can, and that one is too quick. Yeah. So here, this is our anticipation from that. And so this is our, this is this initial part here. This is our winding up of the whole thing. So depending on what we wanted to do here, doing something like this will make it seem like, it's a very quick drawback and then a sort of let go there on this. Right, so then let go of each one. So the anticipation here, Trenton, is this part of it, the initial drawback, right? If we're starting down, then back and swing. So really trying to tune the swing, see if you can get that, just what feels like a really natural motion to it. And then do I have the motion blur on? Did I turn that on or off? And so this amount of time that we're hanging here at the beginning is where we can provide some of the anticipation character, right? And so if we're tuning this over here like that, right? Now we definitely have that cartoon moment of, before we let go of the hammer.
Isn't there like a cartoon term called like pocket dimension? Because like characters like Tom and Jerry or any cartoon characters can just pull a gigantic hammer out of thin air.
Yeah.
Like a pocket dimension.
Yeah, again, like informed by physics, but, exaggerated for sure.
I don't think pulling something out of thin air is informed by physics.
We're just not there yet. Not for you, right? I manifest stuff out of the quantum dimension all the time. I just don't do it in class. It's my secret.
You know what's funny? There's actually an anime about that.
Uh-huh.
It's, I forgot the name.
I mean, I feel like you can say that about pretty much anything at this point.
But it's this here. He's born a hero, but his skill is he has like a digital supermarket where you can buy stuff and quit out of different dimensions.
That does sound good. That's a good setup. Cool. Okay, so we got one there. Let's give one a little bit more energy. So it does a right the whole way around. And so now, again, we're keyframing gravity, physics, but before we did it in position, which is where you should start, that makes obvious sense, right? Like it's the up and down nature of it. But now we're not going to move the hammer. We need to make it look like it has gravity in the rotation transform property. And so let's do that. And I'm going to take this one and Shift D it and put it over here. And So now we want to get the whole way around here. And so rather than, it needs to hit the bottom position. And so let's just go ahead and I'm going to clear the slate here. Let's block it out, right? In terms of, we want to be able to control the speed for when we hit here and when we hit up there, right? And so here we want to make sure we are in local up here. There we go. And now we're back at 0. There we go. There we go. And let's keyframe that. And now we want to keep swinging the whole way around. And so we'll come up here. And we want to make sure we get back to there, back to 0. But we've got to put, in order to not, right, so now we're in rotational, this is referred to as, polar coordinates, right, degrees. And so I can't go 0, 180, 0. I need to go 360 so that we rotate in the correct direction. There we go. And so now we will go from 0. There we go. Hold on. I think I just put it the wrong place. There we go. Up. And now if we go forward, let's rotate this way. There we go. And one more time. Or actually, we won't go up as far. Maybe up to there. And then start back. Okay, so if we look at this second one now with our anticipation. Here's where we need to, where is it going to be going quickly? Here at the bottom, right? So at this point, this is going, remember, slope is velocity. And so closer to vertical means going very fast here. And so if we start to speed that up, and then here at the top, where we're hitting the very top of it, this should be the point at which we want to slow down right there. And so grabbing the handles and creating this kind of graph that I forget the name of in math class. What is this? This is a, yeah, I thought there was an, like an asymptotic, so flattening this out means that we are slowing down and then speeding up again as we drop down. The degree to which we're slowing down here at the top has to do with how far, just like we did with the swing on the other side, the further we drag these handles out, the slower we slow down here at the end. There we go. And so we see that this doesn't look like gravity here because we are on right here on this one. We just need some more velocity. And so more like this. I think this needs to be a lot closer. There we go. And we're probably going to need another swing here. And like on the other side, hang a little bit more at the end of the swing. Maybe take a little bit more time there. Let's see how that looks. Okay, I feel good about the general easy. I have the right points easing in and easing out, but I don't feel super great about the timing of it. I'm going to go back to dope sheet here. And now that I have the right setup, play with the timing of it a little bit here. And so this is up, and then this down, up. I want this all to go a little bit quicker, I think. So I'm going to move these a bit closer. There we go. Too much of a pause here on that one. And I just want that first getting up over the hill to have a little bit more velocity to it. So right there. There we go. Seems to slow down a little bit on the way up. Keep that speed. Better. And bring this one in a little bit. That's good, but in order to motivate this one actually going the whole way around, perhaps our anticipation needs to be exaggerated, right? And so here, this first goes the whole way back to here. And so I'll press, make sure I'm lined up on that keyframe. I'll press I, only selected channel, there we go. And so now, I didn't have the channel selected, there we go. Rotate back even further. I, there we go. So now this one goes way back. There we go. And then it just needs one more keyframe there at the end. So if we look at this over here, just so it keeps moving past the end of the edit. Right, comes up over here, and then back down. So Control C, Control V, or actually, it's probably easier, especially on this kind of bounce thing, Control C, Control V, and then just move this in, right, so that we know we're continuing. Again, these bounces or swings do look better if they're symmetrical. This is part of the reason we're getting that change in speed right there. There we go. There we go. So again, keyframing gravity, but doing it all in rotation, really be able to control the idea of, what is gravity doing here? It's accelerating the rotation. And yeah, the degree to which we pause there in the middle, it's all about this one here, right? Is this one totally flat? A little bit less so means it'll continue moving. I like that a little bit better. Not enough initial velocity quite yet. There we go. I like the feel in that. Let's look at that again, full screen. So it's all about just controlling the acceleration and deceleration of the objects, right? But in this case, we have to do that on this rotational parameter. That initial velocity is not quite high enough. I want this prep to be a little bit more exaggerated. And then over here, let's give this a little bit more. There we go. That gives us a little bit more of that roller coaster. Top of the roller coaster feel. Right, where it seems like the top of the roller coaster takes like 30 seconds once you get to the very top to go over that very, very, very top. Oh, that'd be a good one we should do towards the end here. Like on just using velocity on a track. Yeah, we can do that one. Cool. All right, good. That's some really good applied stuff there. We are anticipating and then also doing our rotation. Thing to keep in mind here, the thing that complicates rotation is this idea that, 0 degrees and 360 degrees are the same position on screen, but once you start keyframing, once you start keyframing rotation, you have to think about like what direction am I going to get there, right? Because if this is 0 and this is 180, am I rotating this way to get there, or am I rotating this way to get there? This has also to do... I'll come back and explain that later. A rotation order situation. Cool. Let's save that one. Okay. That's really keyframed at this point. Let's go ahead and we're moving in arcs here, right? So like the next one on our path over here is arcs, but we're gonna sort of skip over to squash and stretch and smears, and then come back to arcs once we have some other stuff in place there, because the squash and stretch allows us to really break down some of what's happening. We'll also do some anticipation for squash and stretch, but it's going to end up happening in the scale rather than in the position or in the rotation like it's happening here. And so let's look at squash and stretch. My main point here is that squash and stretch, this idea that we are deformed by gravity, or let's say acceleration. This is essentially what squash and stretch is. When we're decelerating, we're getting squished. When we're accelerating, we're getting stretched, right? This exists on a continuum, right? You can say, well, this animation is better because it has squash and stretch. Like squash and stretch is not binary. It's not on or off. There's some sort of left-hand side of the continuum where there is, barely, let's say, no deformation, and there's some sort of right-hand side of the continuum where there's extreme deformation. And so we're going to try to place a few bouncing balls along this continuum to really get an idea of what's going on here from a point of exaggeration. Let's do something a little bit different render-wise. And so I'm going to save this one, and let's just start blank here. And of course, get rid of this. And in order to squash and stretch here, not with the circle, but rather with the sphere, if we were to look at this and look at it from the side, and shade smooth this, there we go. When I just go to adjust the scale on this ball, it looks okay for what we're doing, but then I start to do this, and you're like, okay, yeah, that's squashing and stretching. But the problem here with this is most of the time we're squashing and stretching in reaction or being motivated by some other object it's moving against, like it's squishing into something, right? A lot of times that's the case. Not always the case. You can just sort of like, if it's very cartoony, just sort of like deform yourself in midair. But this is the situation. If we have a floor of some kind, and we move that down and scale it up, there we go. Let's look at this over here with the shadow so it's easier to see. If I look at this from the side, yeah, when I would go to squish the ball, it changes the position of the ball relative to the ground. And so you're stuck in this without, if you keep the anchor point in the middle, right? So origin in middle means that you have to move when you squash or stretch, but in this case I'll just say squash, right? Because if I did this, well, you've got to compensate here by moving this down this way to make it still have contact on the ground. If I want to start going the other way, well, now I'm through the floor, so I need to compensate up here to have it sit on the ground, right? This is not great. Not the best practice, right? It's not the way you want to do it. We can fix this by moving the origin to the bottom of the sphere, right? And that is going to address this issue, right? I'm going to make a new sphere just to stay clean. Let's smooth that. And so now I'll tab into edit mode. I'll press N, come over here to tool, view, I need to be in object mode, sorry. Origins, there we go. And yeah, turn on snap again and move this down to here, right? It's at the bottom of the sphere. Now, watch what happens. As I squash the ball, it squashes into the ground because the ball is on the ground there. See how that makes this whole enterprise much easier than move, trying to deform here and then compensate, right? Because you want to use the position for the actual bouncing of the ball. You don't want it all junked up with all these keyframes that are merely there to compensate for the change in the deformation. Okay? So is this the case with absolutely every squash and stretch that you need to move the anchor point? No. But in cases where you're going to make impact with something, right? So this case, we're going to make the ball bounce up and down. Okay? But if we were throwing the ball this way, and the ball was going to smash up against the wall over here, it might be a good idea to put the anchor point over here. So the ball would, again, smash up against the wall over here. We'll do one like this coming up here when we do an advanced one. Okay? Okay, let's put this back at 1. And let's make this more of like an isometric kind of thing. And so I'm going to save this file, save as, and we're going to say this principles of motion graphics, and this is going to be squash and stretch continuum. There we go. And we will save that. I'm going to scale up this plane. Let's get out of origins. Let's just grab the plane, scale this up. I want my camera to sort of look down on this, and so I'm going to grab the camera object and press Control-Alt-0. And so that gives me this isometric look. I'm going to make it look more isometric by using a long focal length. I'm not going to talk a lot about that today, but just dial up like 120. There we go. And so that gives me this more isometric look. And yeah, we'll come back to that and adjust it a little bit later. But that'll get us started with what's going on here. And then I'm going to put in a sunlight. And light, sun, and remember we rotate the sunlight and the shadow we'll leave it at that for now. Okay. I want some color. So let's grab this. Let's make a couple quick materials, maybe a little bit more fun than we did before. So let's go over to shading and make a couple of materials. Okay. So on the plane here, I'm going to give it checkerboard. There we go. And here, say new material from nodes. We'll call this black and white. There we go. And this one, I can draw this out and go checker, checker texture, color. There it gives us that. You can pick the colors for this here. Let's make it a little bit more like so. You can also adjust the scale on this, kind of like that. Okay, I like that. And I'm going to make this a little bit more reflective. Like so. When you go to the shading workspace, it automatically goes to the material preview viewport, which makes it, there's automatically an HDR in the scene. So that makes it a little bit easier to see. And then over here, we're going to make this one, give this one some pattern. What if it was noise?
I gotta be at work in an hour, so I gotta head out early.
Where do you work?
At a movie theater?
Oh, okay.
It sucks. Don't work.
Yeah, the person in the morning class is in the same boat there. Okay, there we go. Give ourselves a little bit of a different look for this one. Let's come back over here. The reason it looks different is because we're not in material preview. You see the difference between the two for right now. I'm going to get my sunlight and perhaps give the shadow angle. Yeah, softens it up a little bit. There we go. All right, so now we need to first bounce, then squash and stretch. And so here with this sphere, let's just name this bounce or sphere bounce. There we go. And let's get some keyframes on here. This needs to bounce. Let's see. Do we want to start at the top or start at the bottom? We started at the bottom. Did we start at the bottom on the other one? We start at the top. We can drop them down. And so it could loop in that instance. No, if we stop it, we start. Yeah, let's start at the bottom. Okay. And so let's come in here and set some Z keyframes. Let's make sure everything's good here. So I'm going to grab the plane first and Alt-G it so that the plane is at 0, 0, 0. Or sorry, the position, it's at 0 on the ground. Then I'm going to Control-A the scale on the plane to make sure that, it looks aligned. The transform has been taken care of. Now here on the sphere, if I Alt-G, meaning move it to the origin, because I moved the anchor point correctly before, it is where it needs to be, right there. That's good. Okay, and so now we're ready to keyframe, in this case, the location on the Z. So there we are. And so we're there, and we will bounce up. And then back down. And back up. So I'm just Control-C, Control-V, Control-C, Control-V, Control-C. Could copy both of them at the same time. Would give you the same kind of thing. But we want to have some leeway here. All right. And so there we go. But this doesn't look like a bounce, right? Because we have no gravity here. Everyone's pretty solid on this at this point. So these bottom ones, we want to make sure here, 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 and yeah, these all need to be set to free. That's going to let us do this, where we can tune them up a little bit, like so that we can get a proper looking bounce on this. Just super slow. Okay, so I don't think we're going to need 240 frames here. Let's put it down to 24 times 5. That's 120. And then let's just shrink these. So again, that scale is super useful here. Grab these. Make sure the playhead is at the beginning. And then if you SX, you can shrink them in. And then G, you can move them to where you need to there. Cool. You want to make sure the center point is not lopsided. That ends up looking strange. You end up just being, looks like gravity is applied not equally. And so there, okay. And one more, Control-C. Control-V, there we go. And again, let's move all this in a little bit. Yeah, so adjusting the time before you get started makes it a little bit easier to get the rough timing right. And to some extent, like we did before, these ones at the end, because the ball is traveling less distance, it's also less time, right? So there's that. And for more cartoony look here, right, this is part of our exaggeration. We can make these more U-shaped rather than like triangle-shaped in order to hang on the top a little bit. Let's get the timing right. It's a little exaggerated. For the default, this is going to be sort of like the left end of the spectrum. And so this will be right about here. Yeah. Yeah, Trenton, everything we do today is on Tuesday's assignment, not tomorrow, a week from tomorrow, right? It's Monday to the following Tuesday is the schedule, right? Once I post the assignment on, Wednesday, if I have a lot of stuff going on Thursday, then that's sort of frozen in time, right? The things that we cover after that, I just try to give everybody more time to work. Okay, no squash and stretch, right? Unsquashed, unstretched. But it is exhibiting gravity. But, we have this here at the bottom where we have no, absolutely no deformation happening. And so this is just bounce. And yeah, for the Tuesday after this, yeah, all of these are on there. Let's go ahead and move. Let's get our gizmos on. I usually have that one by default. Okay, and so we've got this, and I'm going to Shift D this over, turn off the snapping. There we go. And okay, we're going to take the same bounce timing and add some squash and stretch here. And so when does it need to squash? Obviously when it hits the ground, right? And it needs to stretch sort of after it hits the ground, when it's sort of at its peak velocity going up and going down. Let's go ahead and over here, let's look at it from the one side view. There we go. And over here with this one, let's start adding some scale keyframes. And so here we're up in the air, and then here is where we need to squash, right? And so we want to, what I like to do is set up 3 keyframes here, here, and here. And so this is undeformed, deformed, undeformed. And so with the scale, I'll set 3 keyframes right there. Then I'll move over to here once we hit the ground. When we hit the ground, Lawson, which one needs to go down? How do we squish the ball down? Z. So Z needs to get less than 1, right? And so 0.8 is a good starter there. And then, but when we squish it down, right, now it just looks like it's a smaller ball than that one. Part of that is because it hasn't squished out. And so when we're doing this in 3D, it needs to go out in 2 directions, the X and the Y in Blender. And so I usually, this, I can't speak to whether this is 100% mathematically correct, but it makes it look good enough if we keep the same amount of change, right? So if this went down by 0.2, then the other ones need to go up by 0.2. So I go 1.2, tab, 1.2, tab, right? And so now we've animated from here and there, right, didn't set the keyframes, 0.8, there we go, 1.2, tab, 1.2, tab, and set the keyframes, there we go. And so now, right here, we can see that we are squishing. Now, you'll say, Casey, the ball is deforming before it hits the ground. Yes, it is. For, in animation, this is sort of our pre-squash. This isn't true for physics, right? In the real world, like it would not deform before it hits the ground. But in this, we're going to compensate for this later on in some other, as we turn up the cartoon knob on this squish, we'll see how that affects it there. And this is, remember, this is a total of I have it at about 3 frames. And so this is happening very quickly, right? The worrying about this where you're like, in this, people are going to get hung up in the difference between this frame and this frame right here. They're going to be like, oh no, you got to remember, the difference between one frame and the next frame is 1/24th of a second, right? It's going by very, very, very quickly. So we have that. And then as we go back, we need to get back to undeformed. And so, Arlinka, what is the undeformed scale for the ball? 1, 1, 1, 1. 1, tab 1, tab 1, and keyframe. There we go. And so now, there we go. That is the visual presentation of a squash. But it's really important to understand that this is just the Z, but the X and the Y are on top of each other. They're identical, right? Because it gets switched out in both directions. If we're doing a 2D version of this, there'd only be 2 to work with. But we have 1 here and then 2 over here, right? Because if we look at it, here is the Y scale and the X scale. See how those 2 lines are the same? They stay there. And so we squish, and then we stretch here as we're accelerating. And so now we go the opposite way. So Anthony, here, we did a 0.2 deformation when we hit the ground. Let's say we do a 0.2 deformation in the other way. And so I want to pull the ball so it gets taller. Which one? What do I have to change Z to what number?
3.
We used 0.2 before. So what's 0.2 plus 1? 1.2. Exactly, right? And now my ball is taller, but we've got to suck in the sides, right? And so these need to get smaller by the same amount. And so 1 minus 0.2 is 0.8. And now set the keyframes, right? And so now, see how they cross lines here? Undeformed, deformed, undeformed, deformed. And then we can get back to undeformed. So you can just copy it. If you Control C, Control V, that makes it a little bit easier, right? And so here's what this looks like on the timeline. That's this right here. This is the squash. And then this is the stretch right there. And so now if we look at this, boom, boom. All right, so now let's look at the holistic timing of the whole thing, where the relationship between when we squash and stretch and when we actually impact the ground, right? So the relationship between these two things is important. We can grab these, Control C, and we can sort of copy and paste them where we need them for the other bounces, right? And so now I have a squash and stretch there and a squash and stretch there. And so now with this one, and it's happening very quickly. Let's look at it here from this angle and hit play. Okay, that's pretty good. Depending on what you'd want to do, actually, let's just, this one, we want it to, when we're moving fast, we want it to deform in that direction. And so what we have here with this part of it, this stretch, we can paste that here to sort of accelerate towards the ground. So if I grab this here and Control C, come over here and Control V, but make sure we start from undeformed. There we go. And so now we stretch, then smush as we hit the ground, then stretch again. And so stretch, squash, stretch, stretch, squash, stretch. And yeah, I suppose it's easier now to just grab the whole thing and once again copy and paste the sequence to where it would be appropriate. Right about here, right about there. There we go. Remember, I want the squash to line up with the sort of bottom of the bounce there. Moving this all over. Remember, it may not line up, like I can't get it like exactly in the middle of this thing because, again, we're talking about you can't go in between frames, right? And so very subtle there. And then same thing with this one. Let's go ahead and delete that and then come over here. Copy this first, Control C, and Control V, right about there. Okay, there we go. And this light is kind of dim. Sunlight, sunlight. There we go, like that better. There we go. little bit stronger shadow, makes it a little bit easier to see the ball's relationship to the ground. Okay, so very subtle, right? Squash and stretch. And so again, we're going to sort of establish a continuum here of like bounce with no squash and stretch, a little bit more exaggerated, super exaggerated, right? Trying to go the whole way along this continuum, right? And what my point in doing this is not that all of your animation should end up over here in Tom and Jerry land where everything is like crazy exaggerated, right? What I'm saying is that as an animator, you want to have multiple styles available to tell whatever artistic story it is that you're telling. And so by being able to animate stuff at different points on this exaggeration continuum of squash and stretch, it really, that's the best case scenario for you. So we have those. Let's start to double down on this system. So let's grab this one here. Okay, and so this one is very subtle. There's no squash and stretch in the first one. This one has just a little bit. I don't like this material anymore. I want a different one. Okay, I just want it to be a solid color. Yeah, let's make them different colors. This one's going to be yellow. Let's say it's shiny. There we go. And this one is going to be orange. Nice. Okay. And I'll Shift D this again and make sure that I move it just over on the X right about here. And let's give it a different, deeper. Whoops, it needs its own material. So get rid of that one, then make a new material. Reddish, but shiny. Redder. There we go. All right. Okay, so now we want to exaggerate the squash and stretch some more on this red ball, right? The yellow ball, just no squash and stretch, very minor squash and stretch on the orange, and that's what we have right now because I just duplicated the orange to make the red. So the red is getting more crazy. Okay, so let's look at this one here, make sure I have the red one selected, and so let's start labeling these. This is bounce, this is squash level 1. Here is squash level 2. There we go. Excellent. Okay. So now one of the sort of ways to start to exaggerate some things here is to expand the amount of time and the degree to which we're actually squashing here, right? We did it like a 0.8 or 0.2, right, which brought us down to like 0.8. It was just more or less like 20% of the volume of the ball, right? And so how can we start to exaggerate that? We can make this bigger. We run into this situation, though, which is interesting and a little bit counterintuitive, right? So I'm going to make this first squash and stretch here on this ball bigger. So I'm going to give myself a little bit more time and sort of move this one out. And then here, the thing that makes it more exaggerated is that we deform more. And so if we look at what this looks like here, right, now at this point, we have stretched way more, right? The other one doesn't stretch till a little bit later, but now this one is stretching considerably more. When we hit the ground, we want to, again, deform and then smush it way down. It's important that, again, right, physics is applied symmetrically for the most part, right? And so by deforming equally in both directions, this is what's referred to as volume preservation, right? The idea that things are filled with air, right? And so if you push down this way, they go out in that way, just like everyone is intuitively aware of with, blow up sports balls and balloons or anything like that, right? And so when you're doing it keyframe style this way, this is one of the ways to, to do that. And then here, same thing. Let's give it a little bit more time. Whoops. By stretching this out. And then also exaggerating the amount here. And so there we go. So way more, okay? But once we start to get this cartoony with it, right? The fact that we start deforming before we hit the ground becomes painfully obvious, right? In fact, that it looks like a pancake before it even hits the ground. And so now, because we're in this cartoon world, right, this is, the scene in The Matrix where she bends the spoon, right? Some rules can be bent, other rules can be broken. The thing we're going to do to compensate for this is that we are going to sit on the ground for longer. We're not going to make this instantaneous change in velocity. And so let's come back to, level 2 here in the Z location. And I'm going to grab this keyframe right here. And I am going to come right about there and Control C, Control V. And so I've duplicated that frame, but then on this one, I'm going to right click and say interpolation constant. And so now I have this period of time between here and here that I'm sitting on the ground. And if I can manipulate this amount of time between here and here, now we can stretch and boom. Now we're sitting on the ground as we deform into it there. You can play with this timing, right? Where how long is it on the ground there? Right, so it really gives you this smooshed into the ground, and then, right, we've got to compensate for the other bounces here. For instance, making this one symmetrical, maybe not hanging in the air quite as long, right? And then, yeah, this is pushing it. If you move this launching off the ground to after the stretch, it's going to make it seem like the stretch shoots you up into the air. If you move this back, right, and I think that's 1 or 2 more off. Remember, we're taking gradual steps along the continuum of exaggeration here. And so this is going to zoom. There we go. And so we need to create the same kind of thing. So I can grab these 2 keyframes here, Control C, and figure out where to paste them right about there. Might have to get rid of one in the middle, and then same thing over here, right? So I get away with a lot of this copying and pasting of keyframes in these situations. Get this one in the middle, get that out of there. And then obviously you're sitting on the ground perhaps for less time. I'm trying to line that up more or less with what's going on there. Orienting the top of these so it's kind of, again, symmetrical. Gravity operates the same on the way up as it does on the way down. And so now we have that. And so there we go, up. Right, so it gives us a lot more time to really enjoy hitting the ground, right? To visually display hitting the ground. Right, so that first one looks really good. The other one's not quite as much because these are the non-exact, like this is the initial level of squash and stretch as opposed to our exaggeration level. And so rather than coming in and tuning these, I think I might just copy and paste this sequence, right? So come back here to these 3. Let's get rid of this one. There we go. And then grab this one, right? So being able to visually identify these things in the timeline is super valuable. And then being able to remember how they're supposed to line up, right? So again, the squash, happening during the time we're on the ground. And so here, there we go. Right, so now the ball is starting to seem very, very squishy, right? Especially when you look at it compared to the ball on the left, right? Which seems very static at this point, completely undeformed, right? The ball in the middle, the orange ball, a little bit of deformation, but this one is getting super squishy. And now, there we go. Control C. Let's get rid of these. Control V. Delete. And then over here, Control V. And perhaps move some of these back. Now we're going to run into the situation where we don't want these to run into each other. And so it may be necessary to sort of like compress the amount of time here on certain parts of this. Perhaps make the later squash and stretches maybe not quite as exaggerated. Remember when I'm selecting the X and Y, I'm always drawing a selection square because there's two there. If I just click on it, see what happens? Now I've adjusted the X but not the Y, right? And so that's not, it's just a pain in the butt. You don't want to do that. And so here, same thing. I just got in this habit from After Effects where it's absolutely necessary to adjust the keyframes this way, or else you'll just drive yourself insane. There we go. So that's substantially squishier. Let's get some label in here. And so over here on this side, we have sort of pure physics. So I'll call this physics. And maybe extrude this a little bit. So in the text, geometry, extrude, there we go. That gives us a little bit of a label. Let's move this over here. And Shift D, X, and over here we're moving along a continuum to cartoon. Not cartoon, cartoon. There we go. Exaggeration. Wingdings. There you go. That sort of encapsulates the vibe of cartoon. Part of the cartoonness over here also has to do with the up and down nature. And so the, again, cartoony thing of like hanging in the air, sort of defying gravity, turning these more into a U shape here will sort of give us more time. And as we go along the exaggeration continuum over here, we'll get more of that hang time. The coyote, before he realizes he's going to fall off the cliff. Yes?
It's actually called coyote time.
Coyote time. Right, so this right here on the graph, that's the coyote time. Okay, that's pretty good. Let's save and keep going here. Find a couple more locations along this continuum here. Next one here would be applying our anticipation. Our anticipation is going to be in the scale here. And so let's Shift D this ball, X, lock it on that axis, move it over a little bit. And this one's going to be level 3. There we go. And over here with this one, let's give it again its own material. And so we'll start coming over here. Again, let's make it in there, like right about that. There we go. Okay, so with this one, rather than just being launched into the air, we can motivate our launch by pre-squashing. Squashing is a way to drive ourselves into the air. So here, at this point, we want to be undeformed as we start to go, or maybe we want to be stretched at this point. And so let's go ahead and add some keyframes for this. So we want to be sort of launching ourselves up. And so here, let's go for it. Crazy exaggeration. So this will be a 2. And then this one over here, this will bring it way down to something like that. There you go. Then we want to get back to undeformed up here. So 1, 1, 1. There we go. And so that really, and so now we want to squash before that. And so this comes way down, and then this goes way out. There we go, like that. And we want to start from undeformed. 1, 1, 1. There we go. Kind of need some more time here. Let's see if we can do it. So, whoosh, as that. And so the relationship between this maximum stretch and the launching of the ball into the air, that there's a lot of fun to be had playing with that relationship. And so here, you see I was just kind of winging it by dialing them in this time, and now those are not the same. And so I can sort of clean that up in the graph in that way. Let's bring this in over here and move this way slightly so that we're stretching after we've moved into that upward motion. And so here, right, and so by starting to move up, it's sort of that relationship between the snap and the going up there. Boom. Mm. Mm. And yeah, I might turn this off so I'm able to grab everything and maybe migrate it a little bit in this direction. Actually, this is probably easier to do in Dope Sheet view, just grabbing everything and just sort of sliding it this way so that actually, did I miss one? Yes, I did. There we go. Turn that off. Yeah, because that's per view. Now I can see everything. Now I can slide everything this way. There we go. So that they stay lined up. And so the amount of time and this, wind up again matters. Or whether you want it to work harder. Right, to get that. If you move this closer to that, then it's going to be more launching itself in the air, right? Getting this very close to that stretch. This is the squash at the bottom. Really launches itself up there. So is this continuum idea making sense to everybody? Okay. Let's just do one more here. So we'll go level 4. Hold on. And we'll move this over like so. And this will be level 4. There we go. And of course level 4 needs its own color. I'll get rid of this. We'll add this here. There we go. Let's keep going on our hue. Over that way. Let's make it smoother. There we go. Purple. Okay. Let's turn that off and turn this on. There we go. And so now, like we did in 200, we want to make it truly provocative. And we can do that with squash, squash and stretch, when you squash and then you stretch, and then that causes a chain reaction, squash and stretch. This ends up looking like jiggle, right? You're just going to get total jello with this. And so here, with this one, you're going to need some more room. There we go. Running into our cartoon text. There we go. Let's move this out. Let's move this over. There we go. And so over here, we're working on this. And so let's grab this one and come back to here, graph editor. And so, boom. And here, we can essentially just create more chain reactions with the jiggle by going back and forth on this. And so if we bring this in, we're going to run out of time a little bit here. But, I mean, time on the timeline, not time in class. So we've got this. We want to have another, like this is the squash, this is the stretch. And then we want to have a chain reaction like we did with the swinging arm, right? This is, it's inertia. That's what's happening here, right, with the springs. And so Control-C, Control-V, we go back the other direction, but we don't want it to go as far. So we dial this down a little bit so that we get, draw that square. There we go, draw that wave, like so. And then maybe one more. So this one is the one going the other one. Notice that each one always goes like in a wave like this. I'm just grabbing the appropriate one, Control-C, Control-V, Control-C, Control-V, bring this down. All right, and so, boom. Wait, did I have more than one selected? I had these two selected. And just hide this one for now. There we go. So now you just got to work out the timing on this so that we have something that's a little bit less, you only have so much time in the air, right? So there's a couple of things you could do. You could stretch out the amount of time it takes to bounce, right? Sort of even exaggerate that coyote time even further, right? If we grabbed all of these like this, and I need more time for this wobbling at the top. I'm going to grab all of these and move them over like so. Maybe not quite that much, maybe right about there. Okay, so that gives me a little more time. I can move this over and then space all of this stuff out a little bit, like so, and give these a little bit less, right? So there's a little bit more subtle. And so now, woo, right, so we get this wobble that happens back and forth between them. And then over here, smooth this out a little bit. The default Bezier handles, when things get this close together, end up being a little bit problematic. These Bezier handles didn't get copied quite right, so I'm just trying to smooth some things out. And then you have to make the question of, do you want to keep wobbling or do you want to have some time where you're not deformed at the top, right? And so here, even for just a few frames, we could be not deformed right there, in which case you want to make sure that these are constant so that it does stay undeformed, then sort of come back down towards Earth. There we go. Let me just fix the other one with the stuff I added erroneously. There we go. And so these right here. I accidentally had the select all on my editing. There we go. And yeah, here we go. Let's go back to level 4 and let's make this much more subtle by not deforming quite as much. It's just more of a jiggle. Right, so it just keeps blah, 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 the whole time as it goes back and forth. I think they're a little too... Let's compress them a little bit. And yeah, trying to smooth out these waves, trying to make sure the peak of the wave. You got to be careful when you're grabbing the handles here. You just want to grab, not the handles, you want to just grab the center of the thing. I'm just doing it really quickly, so some of these have gotten a little distorted. Just trying to smooth this out. So for the first couple of bounces, it may be possible because you've got more time. For the other ones, right, how much more jiggling can you do? Right, the jiggling, the other thing here is if it's in constant motion, something that's going to make it seem more jiggly is not having this time where it comes to perfect rest in the middle, right? And so if I get rid of this keyframe here, now we're going to make sure that we are always deforming with this ball, the purple one. Same thing here. There'll be no point at which the purple ball comes to rest undeformed. And so we'll get that. Right, so it's very rubbery now. There's the issue of the anchor point for the wobbling maybe not being the best at the bottom when we get to the far right ball. We can look at some ways around that when we do this with a bone rig rather than with positional keyframes. But understanding here how to manipulate these with this in mind. Right, we've got this continuum here of cartoonish. And so what you need to show me is that you can explore this continuum, right? In terms of like where I added the actual wobble, where I stuck it to the ground, I was trying to show you a series of things you can incrementally do to sort of travel down that continuum, right? In terms of like which ball got which things to take the next step, right? You need to use your visual taste here in terms of like, okay, I think this looks like it's incrementally more cartoonish than the next thing, right? But overall, the whole thing needs to, take a step from that along the continuum, right? If this one did the pre-squash faster, perhaps, I think it was something like this. Maybe went even further that way, right? And so we did that. That might really get it going. Worm. Right, so the one on the end is total jiggle, never coming to rest, especially when you compare it to the one on the left, the yellow ball, right, the screen left. You can see how much we've traveled along this continuum. Now, in the principles of motion graphics, this is labeled as squash and stretch and smears, right? The idea of smearing is essentially stretching, right? You're lengthening along the direction that you're going. And so, yeah, I think that's great. Very jiggly on the end. All with just position and scale keyframes, right? There's all sorts of other things you can do that we'll look at to do jiggle and wobble in other different procedural ways. But this, in order to actually understand what you're doing, I think it's really necessary to demonstrate this stuff. Does it make sense what we did here today? Okay. I know some of you guys touched on some of this in 184, but I like to take a deep, you should feel very, very familiar with these principles by the time we're done here. Where it's like, oh yeah, I can visually identify that, and I know exactly how that kind of thing should look on the timeline. Sound good? Okay, awesome. Okay, everybody, on the live stream, hope to see more beautiful faces in person on Wednesday. Remember, we'll spend the first part of class looking at everybody's projects, which will be more exciting than the first week because we actually did something. And then you guys did your own hammer animations. I saw some interesting ones coming over the Discord. And then we'll look at applying arcs here to this when we take something and maybe smush it up against the wall. Cool. And so this will put us like 2/3 of the way through our principles of motion graphics. Just do a few things with this next week and then start applying these to multi-part things, working our way towards characters. Sounds good? Okay, awesome. And see you guys later. Oh, wait. I wanted to announce the thing. I'll do it again on Wednesday. I stopped the live stream. So those of you who haven't seen, I posted the link to the lecture search. And so this is live now. This gets updated every Thursday, right? So after I do the lectures, this squash, right? And I just want to look in 287. And so there we go. And so you can go directly to that point in the lecture. This image looks cool. I like this. This looks great. If I come back, yeah, I like it too. All right. So it's searching the entire lecture, but then taking it to the relevant timestamp. And so I've got, the YouTube transcripts get pulled down and cleaned up with some language model stuff, and then it timestamps everything. And then in addition to that, you can look at all of the timestamps per week. And so like last week, boom, is here, and it puts all of the timestamps for the entire lecture in this outline format, which is sort of like a rough outline of what we covered in class. And so this should also be, I hope, super useful, right, in terms of it taking you directly to that part of the class. And then if you're interested, like all of the other classes are available as well. If you're, Blender. For the most part, it cleans up the transcripts pretty well. I have it correcting a bunch of automatic things. Like it kept transcribing UVs as groovy, and I told it I never say groovy in class. Like anytime you think it's groovy, it should be UV. And that's good. And then, yeah, I was doing AVC as ABC. But anyways, it cleans those things up, and then this stuff happens. But this is not totally automatic. This is like the thing I put on top of the YouTube automatic transcripts. And so usually I run this on Thursday when I'm at home, when it can go back and look at, like, both the transcripts are done for the lectures by that point, and so it can pull them down, timestamp them, and then put everything back. So hopefully that's useful. Let me know if you're using it. And yeah, the link, I'll put the link to it on all of the assignments coming forward, but for right now it's up on Discord. So this is a fun recent project, and now it's seems to be working fairly solidly. And if you want to peek at some of the stuff the other classes are doing, it's all there as well as last semester stuff. AVC 287 is not taught every semester. I taught 240 last semester, but if you want to look at the last semester stuff, because some of it's relevant, you can also tell it to look at fall 2025. But keep in mind, the timing's not the same. Sometimes we cover different stuff for different weeks, but there's more, especially because you can search everything. If you want to see what I said about UV unwrapping, last semester, and it's all in there, then you can, find all of those sections about that from whatever it is that we're looking at that point. So yeah, YouTube's great, but especially when you have these longer videos like I have, which, editing them is just not in the cards. That means I would have to edit 15 hours of video a week in addition to doing my job, and that's just not going to happen. So this seems like a pretty good solution to that problem. Okay, I'll do that spiel again on Wednesday when everyone can see it, because I meant to do it at the beginning of class.